Please join us in welcoming the CEO of one of America's most storied civil rights organizations, the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt.
So I have a professional reason for being here today, but also a personal one. As some of you know, my wife, Marjan, was born and raised in Iran. She fled the country as a 14-year-old on her own, and then lived for years. Years after the revolution, she left, and then lived in France with relatives for years, and finally was reunited with her parents. They all eventually settled in Los Angeles. Marjan and her family, like so many of you here in this room, have thrived in the diaspora. And I'm proud that we have 3 beautiful children, a warm and loving household, filled with lots of choresh and kebab, tachin and tadik, sangak and shirin polo, you name it. Like many of you, Marjan and our whole family are incredibly proud of our Persian heritage. And I am immensely proud of the fact that she is a fierce advocate for the rights of women and other minorities in Iran. I am so proud that all of our boys speak Farsi, and I hope one day that all of us will have the opportunity to walk the tree-lined streets of Tehran, to picnic in the mountains, to drink chai in the country that my boys have heard so much about all of their lives. Now, Marjan will be on the next panel, so I'm going to be brief, because I'm also here for a practical reason, tied to my job as head of the ADL. For more than a century, ADL has been fighting anti-Semitism and threats against the Jewish people. And for the past 45 years, the Islamic Republic of Iran has been the largest state sponsor of terrorism, the most significant exporter of anti-Semitism, and the primary actor in the field of Holocaust denialism anywhere in the world. For decades, Tehran has cultivated a network of terror proxies across the Middle East who are bound together by a shared ideology of anti-Jewish racism. And it rests on a few key planks: dehumanizing Israelis, rationalizing anti-Semitism, and working actively, relentlessly, unapologetically to destroy the Jewish state. This hatred, this animus, was an animating element of the Islamic Revolution as framed by Khomeini. The clerical leaders who cling to this mantle, still today, they hold on to these genocidal objectives in order to sustain the fraud of their empty, impotent revolution. But the results are real: a bloody trail of deadly acts and foiled plots against Israeli interest and Jewish sites all around the world. The globe is littered with the debris of their designs. From Argentina to Bulgaria, Colombia to France, Sweden to India, Thailand to right here in the United States. And of course, the regime has been the main sponsor of Hamas, the Palestinian chapter of the Muslim Brotherhood, for decades. The brutality we saw on October the 7th was straight out of the Islamic Republic's playbook. They saw the rape of women, the slaughtering of seniors, the torture of children, the annihilation of communities, the kidnapping of innocent civilians, And they cheered. While Israel battles Iran's proxies across the region right now, we at ADL are committed to do what we can right here to play our part in this fight. That's why this summer ADL took legal action against the Islamic Republic of Iran. And we filed a landmark federal lawsuit on behalf of 180 American citizens who were affected by the massacre on 10/7. We've assembled an all-star legal team that has won these kinds of cases before. And let me tell you as clear as I can, and if you take away one thing from my remarks, let it be this, that ADL will do everything in our power to demonstrate how the Islamic Republic, along with Syria and North Korea, provided material support to Hamas to commit their atrocities. We will make that case, and we will win. Now, some people might ask, they might say, well, who cares? Do you think the mullahs in Tehran are interested in what happens in federal court just down the street here in D.C.? But it matters. It does matter. And let me explain why. First, in a world in which 10/7 denialism took hold almost immediately after the attack, we hope this case will set the record straight about Hamas's heinous brutality, perpetrated with the direct support of Iran and other state sponsors of terror. Second, in a world in which and where Jewish pain is too often erased, I believe this case has the promise of bringing some measure of justice. When we win this $4 billion lawsuit, and again, we will win, we will be able to provide the families with some degree of compensation despite the fact that they lost everything. It certainly won't fill the holes in their lives. I don't think anything can do that. But we still want justice. And finally, for those, certainly not in this room, not here today, but for those who defend the despotic regime in Tehran, for those who downplay its destructive role in the world, or who try to sugarcoat what they do, we will prove in court definitively, with evidence, the role that they played, and bind this regime to the history books so that history will know that they were behind one of the most barbaric acts of the 21st century. So if nothing else, we need to win this case, partly to counter the propaganda pumped out endlessly by this regime. And by the way, I would say to you that this is arguably today Iran's most consequential export. It's not UAVs to Russia, it's not petrol to India, but anti-Semitic Western propaganda that is poisoning the public conversation. Whether via press TV in North America or Hispan TV in Latin America, whether via the fake news websites they've put up or the bot armies on social media that they command, the regime broadcasts like an IV drip a steady flow of Holocaust denialism, anti-Jewish conspiracies, and toxic lies about America to the scores of millions of viewers and hundreds of millions of users who consume information on these platforms. Now, you know, some scoffed at ADL and at me personally when we reported earlier this year that we saw worrying indications of the Iranian regime's influence on the anti-Israel, pro-Hamas protests on college campuses. I remember being attacked by so-called extremism experts on X when I pointed out that campus activists were acting like Iranian proxies, promoting regime talking points and spreading their lies. Interestingly, this past summer, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence confirmed DNI Haynes reported that Tehran is encouraging the protests, even providing financial support. Funny enough, none of those analysts reached out to correct the record. Earlier this month, that same office, along with the FBI and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, published a rare joint statement, all three together, laying out how Tehran is seeking to, quote, stoke discord and undermine confidence in our democratic institutions. And wait, there's more. Google reported that they recently discovered Iranian hackers tried to penetrate former President Donald Trump and Joe Biden's campaigns. And it was reported that the Trump campaign had documents stolen from them by Iranian hackers they tried to sell to the Harris campaign. As Axios put it, Iran, not Russia, is proving to be the biggest nation-state threat to the U.S. presidential election. And we've all seen the reports how the regime plotted to assassinate President Trump. And so make no mistake, this conflict I'm talking about with the Islamic Republic isn't just about Israel, and it isn't just about the Jewish people. This is a struggle pitting militant Islamism, religious extremism, and violent terrorism against Western nations and our values like democracy, pluralism, religious tolerance, and the individual freedoms that we cherish here in the U.S. These principles, these very basic liberties, undergird our secular shared society. Unfortunately, much of the media, the same outlets that breathlessly describe Hamas as a, quote, resistance organization, or call Hezbollah, quote, an influential Shia Muslim political party. That's the BBC, if you want to check. They don't acknowledge the reality that the Islamic Republic of Iran has rebuffed appeals for détente and peace. It doesn't matter how their leaders dress, or what degrees they have, or what their prior occupations might be. The leadership of this regime and all those in the so-called axis of resistance prefer to menace and threaten America and our allies and our interests. And the regime apologists and useful idiots in the West who minimize their intent truly have no ground to stand on. And so I believe it's time for a new approach to the Iranian regime. Ideally, one that comes out of a new grand theory of the region. This is what we need. A framework that's informed by history, but that's rooted in reality. That sees the world not as we want it to be, but as it is, and that pursues our interests zealously, that stands with our allies unapologetically, and that lays a better pathway for our children. And it's time, in my opinion, it is time for all those who stand with the values that I laid out to join together to oppose this ruthless regime that slaughters its own citizens and spreads ruin across the region, and that champions the idea of genocide against the Jewish state. That's why it warms my heart, not just to be here, but it makes me feel encouraged when I see hashtags trending, like hashtag Iranian stand with Israel. And it will make me even prouder when this is not just a nice-sounding slogan, but a sustainable reality. When we can restore the once warm ties that united Israel and Iran, and even better, even more importantly, when that is the first step on a process of true healing and reconciliation. Indeed, it will make me most proud when all of us can contribute to rebuild the pluralistic and positive legacy of one of the most civilizing civilizations in the history of the world. That's the legacy we're talking about. One that openly embraces all segments of society. One that treats men and women as equals. One that genuinely accepts and appreciates all religious minorities, including Zoroastrians, Baha'i, Christians, Mandeans, Muslims, and those that don't have any faith at all. One that equitably values all ethnic groups, including Persians, but also Arabs and Azeris, Baluchis, Kurds, and all people. This is the Iran that I want my children, that I want all of our children to visit one day. So thank you so much for inviting me here to speak. Thank you so much for the work that you do at Nufti every day, despite what the critics say, to create a more hopeful future for the people of Iran. Thank you so much for your commitment to this cause of freedom. And thank you again so much for your hospitality. Now I would invite you to stay tuned for what undoubtedly will be the best panel of the conference. Thank you.